In 2024, will you certify the election results? Do you plan to object, or will you accept the results regardless of who wins the election?
So Kaitlan, I got to say, I think that's actually a ridiculous question.
It's a yes or no question, though.
No, it's not. Let me explain why it's a ridiculous question. It's not a question. You've ever asked a Democrat that?
Of course.
What Democrat?
But what?
And that was Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, unfortunately, eating Kaitlan Collins' lunch on CNN. Because even though the point the CNN host got out of the senator is that he may not accept the 2024 election results, the way Collins phrased the question was ridiculous. Will you accept the results, yes or no? Is silly. There could be natural disasters, power outages, all kinds of scenarios that might interfere with a clean vote and election. Collins should have started with, if the Justice Department and FBI say, as they did in 2020, that there's no evidence of significant fraud that would change the election outcome, will you accept the results? Phrasing the question that way is clear and specific, but being broad and vague at the start gave Cruz an opening.
So you're asking, will you promise no matter what to agree an election is illegitimate regardless of what happens? And that would be an absurd thing to claim. Like, we have an entire election law system that people challenge elections. Elections get overturned. Voter fraud gets proven. That happens all the time. And the media engages in this weird game post-Donald Trump that you insist no voter fraud has ever existed. Why does every state have laws in place to challenge voter fraud if it occurs?
The media
Why do you have election challenges?
This isn't a game. There was no widespread voter fraud.
You only ask Republicans that.
Because it was Republicans who tried to block the transition of power. You have to acknowledge that.
So
we've never seen it on a scale of what happened in 2020, and we've never seen the president refuse. He wouldn't even let Joe Biden get classified briefings at the beginning. I recall that. So my question for you again, free and fair election, will you accept the results regardless of who wins?
That's better by Collins. Free and fair. Will you accept the results regardless of who wins?
Look, if the Democrats win, I will accept the result, but I'm not going to ignore fraud regardless of what happens.
But was there fraud in 2020?
Of course there was fraud in 2020.
No, there wasn't, and you still objected.
Actually, there was fraud in 2020, just as there is some fraud in every election. But what the Trump Attorney General Bill Barr said is that the Justice Department and FBI found no evidence of enough fraud to change the 2020 results. But by not stating that, and by saying there was no fraud, Collins let Cruz put her and CNN on the defensive.
Oh, you know for a fact there was zero voter fraud. Really? What's your basis for that? Show me your evidence.
We've spoken with Governor Kemp. They did 3 hand recounts in the state of Georgia. The director of CISA said that it was the safest, most legitimate election.
But you're saying zero voter fraud occurred. That's what you just said.
Nothing that would have changed the outcome of that election.
Okay, but that's a different statement.
But no, it's not.
Actually, it is a different statement. And that statement, there was not enough fraud to have changed the election, is where Collins should have started. Finally, Collins gets precise.
You said there was no voter fraud.
There was no voter fraud that would have changed the outcome of the election, and you know that, Senator.
So what I know is that what I stood on the Senate floor and objected, what I called for, I'll tell you, I wrestled with what to do in that circumstance. And the reason I wrestled with it is because I think there was significant voter fraud in 2020.
Now, at that moment, Collins should have interrupted and said, so you do not accept the conclusions made by the Justice Department and FBI that there was not significant fraud? Putting Senator Cruz on the spot and up against federal law enforcement agencies would have been interesting and enlightening. How does Ted Cruz know more than the FBI? That's a good follow-up. Doesn't that suggest he is really just a Trump stooge? But Collins goes back to her initial question about the 2024 election.
Let me ask you one. It's Republicans have twisted themselves in knots. It's just a yes or no question.
I'm not twisting myself. I'm answering your question. You just don't like my answer.
And what's your answer? Is it yes or is it no?
So in 1876, what Congress did is it appointed an election commission. It consisted of 15 people.
Cruz then went on and on about the 1876 election and commission and said a similar mechanism is what should have been put in place at the end of 2020.
I think the country would have been a lot better off with a determination of what evidence of voter fraud there was that occurred, and instead the media didn't want to hear it and insists voter fraud never occurs. You ought to go back and look at the Carter-Baker Commission. It was
the Attorney General, and my question was about 2024.
It was the media. It was CNN that relentlessly pushed that propaganda.
Here, Collins is correct. It was Attorney General Bill Barr, a Trump appointee, who said there was not enough fraud to change the results. The media, including CNN, reported Barr's findings. But by waiting until the end of this 10-minute interview to invoke Bill Barr, Collins is now playing catch-up, and Cruz gets to rip the media for what he calls propaganda, a claim that Collins should have slammed back in his face. Kaitlan Collins seems like a nice person, but she has proven repeatedly that she is not a strong or precise interviewer. And against a seasoned debater like Senator Cruz, the result is unfortunate, to say the least. Ted Cruz is up for re-election in 2024, and CNN should have pinned him down on this stuff instead of letting him run roughshod until the final minute or so. Relatedly, Donald Trump said some very nasty things about Senator Cruz, the senator's wife, and Ted Cruz's father in the 2016 campaign. And Cruz's explanation for supporting Trump and working with the Trump administration sounded reasonable.
And, you know, when he became president, I had a choice to make. I could be pissed. I could be pissed off at what he'd done. But if I was going to do that, he'd just been elected president. I got a job. I got a job to represent 30 million Texans. And frankly, if I was going to let my hurt feelings make me say, I'm not going to work with you, I needed to be prepared to resign my job and go home. I think Donald Trump is a unique character in American history. There are things he says and does that I like. There are things he says and does that I don't like. He says all sorts of things I wish he didn't say. I value civility in politics. I think we should treat each other with respect, even if we disagree with each other. I can't control what other people say. I can't control what other Republicans say. I can't control what other Democrats say.
But Ted Cruz did control most of this CNN primetime interview, and that's regrettable. To be clear, there are a few CNN hosts who do a fine job managing an adversarial interview and pinning down a guest, even one as slippery as Ted Cruz. Kaitlan Collins, though, is not one of those CNN hosts, which is probably why Ted Cruz agreed to talk with her. By the way, one of Donald Trump's fiercest supporters in the U.S. House, Marjorie Taylor Greene, is now getting blasted by law enforcement for her claims that the Biden administration wants Trump killed.
They want President Trump dead. They want to lock him up in jail for the rest of his life so that he dies in jail. And they want to take away his Secret Service protection so that he is murdered somewhere in jail, possibly.
Marjorie Taylor Greene claims the Biden DOJ and FBI were planning to assassinate Trump. What are Republicans going to do about it? Greene pointed to page 11 of the Mar-a-Lago search warrant that says law enforcement officers of the Department of Justice may use deadly force when necessary. And MTG tweeted, the Biden DOJ and FBI are planning to assassinate Trump and gave the green light. CNN's Ellie Honig.
This is ridiculous. There's nothing to see here. It is, if anything, a very tight limit on when you can use lethal force. Almost never. It appears in every search warrant, every operational plan, ops plan.
Check out that video at the link below. It generated a lot of comments on YouTube. One of the most popular is from No Name 1092, who wrote, remove MTG from all committees ASAP. Some Republicans are reportedly now considering just that. Anyway, I look forward to reading your comments about Ted Cruz versus CNN. I'm David Shuster. Thanks for joining us.